Alright, buckle up, because this one's all about the birth of independence on a whole new level. Something that goes beyond battles and skirmishes and dives right into how the colonies themselves started shaping what America would one day become. It's 1777. The American Revolution is well underway and the colonies, 13 of them to be exact, are in the thick of rebellion against British rule. And this was no longer just a reactionary movement against a tyrannical king and unfair taxation, it was transforming into a revolution that went much deeper. The colonies weren't just declaring freedom from Britain, they were each creating new identities, individual states charting their own paths forward. So imagine this, the British Empire has lost control over its rebellious colonies. The royal governors are out of power and the old colonial charters are no longer the law of the land. In other words, the slate has been wiped clean. Now, the colonists had to ask themselves the big questions. What should our governments look like? How should we structure our laws? In essence, they were creating new nations from scratch. 13 experiments in self-rule, some more successful than others, but each as ambitious as the last. The first state to jump into this new world was New Hampshire in 1776. And once they had set the example, the rest followed suit in a cascade that would leave America forever changed. Let's focus on one particular year though. 1777, the year of reorganization. New York, Delaware, Georgia, North Carolina and Vermont all stepped up and said, "We're not just rebelling, we're restructuring." Here's where it gets even more intriguing. Writing a state constitution wasn't just about putting pen to paper and calling it done. Each constitution was a bold declaration of values and principles, tailored to that particular state's vision of freedom and governance. April 20th, 1777. New York adopted its constitution. Unlike the fast, slapdash approach of New Hampshire, New York took its time, trying to get the balance right. The key players like John Jay were meticulous, taking elements they liked from British governance and mixing them with revolutionary ideals. New York's constitution featured a bicameral legislature, an independent judiciary, and a system of checks and balances. Essentially, it was their first attempt at giving the people, not the king, the power. They were laying down the bricks for the future American Constitution, and they did it in a way that other states would look to as a model. This wasn't just a bunch of men in wigs signing a document, it was revolutionary in its scope, creating a legal structure in which the people, rather than a monarch, held power. The New York Constitution separated powers, had an executive branch, and even discussed individual rights, though they left the Bill of Rights for later. It was a blueprint for a new world where governance wasn't just about control but about representation. And while New York was ironing out its constitution, we've got Vermont on the side, making a move that was completely off the charts. Vermont, then just a patchwork of frontier settlements caught between New York and New Hampshire, decided to declare independence, not just from Britain but from New York too. They said, "Forget you, we're doing our own thing," and they declared themselves the Vermont Republic. And although they weren't officially recognized by the Continental Congress, they wrote their own constitution anyway. The Vermont Constitution was radical. For one, they banned slavery outright, something unheard of at the time. They also gave the right to vote to all adult males, not just property owners, which was pretty progressive. Vermont was basically telling the rest of the colonies, look, we're not just fighting to be free of Britain, we're fighting to be free from any chains. So here we have the Vermont Republic, unofficial, unrecognized, but undeniably revolutionary. Vermont would have to wait until 1791 to become a state officially, but at that moment, they were more independent than anyone else. Back in the other colonies, this shift wasn't just about declarations of independence or even military strategy anymore. It was about envisioning and drafting what each state's future would look like. Delaware, North Carolina, and Georgia, all these states started drafting their own constitutions, adjusting governance structures that would suit them best and would meet the needs and expectations of their citizens. These new constitutions tackled the power dynamics, deciding how governors would be selected and how laws would be created and enforced. And in doing so, the states set up their own mini-republics, making it clear that they were no longer just colonies in rebellion, they were sovereign entities charting their own paths. But this wasn't an easy process, not by a long shot. There were intense debates on what the new states should look like. Some wanted strong central governance like they'd had under British rule, albeit led by elected representatives instead of monarchs. Others favored localized power, where each town or county would have a say, avoiding the kind of overreach they'd experienced from British rule. And then came the question of rights. Do you write them into the Constitution, or is that something separate? While some states explicitly included rights, others preferred the minimalist approach. This clash of ideas would lay the foundation for the bigger national debate that would come years later with the drafting of the United States Constitution. So why does this all matter? Why should we care that these colonies turned into self-governing states with their own constitutions? Well, because this was where the very idea of America as a nation truly began. Each state wasn't just a stepping stone in the war for independence. They were setting examples, creating frameworks, and learning hard lessons that would influence every decision made when it came time to build a national government. These new constitutions represented a vision for a new kind of society. One that operated without a monarch and that upheld the idea of rights, albeit unevenly distributed, and governance by the people. They didn't all get it perfect, but they all contributed to a melting pot of ideals and policies that would shape America's identity. In the end, these state constitutions were more than just documents. They were symbols of what this new world could be. The people in New York, Delaware, Vermont, and the other colonies weren't just forming governments. They were putting down markers for freedom and independence that would reverberate through history. Each one of those state constitutions was a step towards an America that didn't just exist as a concept, but as a reality. So next time you think about America's founding, don't just picture the Declaration of Independence or the Continental Congress. Picture those brave states that, even in the fog of war and uncertainty, stood up and said, "We're ready to govern ourselves, come what may."